December 1944. The Western Front. Snow falls silently across the dense forests of the Ardennes, blanketing the rolling hills of Belgium and Luxembourg in white. American soldiers, confident that the war in Europe is winding down, huddle around fires in frost-covered foxholes. They believe the worst is behind them. They are wrong. In the pre-dawn darkness of December 16th, the earth erupts. German artillery tears through the winter morning with a fury not seen since the invasion of France. Operation Wacht am Rhein, the Watch on the Rhine, has begun. The world will come to know it as the Battle of the Bulge, Hitler's desperate gamble to split the Allied forces and capture the vital port of Antwerp. But beneath this massive conventional assault lurks something far more insidious. Something that will shake the very foundation of trust within the American lines. This is the story of Operation Greif, the Griffin, the most audacious deception operation of World War II, where German soldiers became Americans, where uniforms became disguises, and where every GI became a potential enemy. 3 months earlier, in September 1944, Adolf Hitler summoned one of his most controversial commanders to the Wolf's Lair, his fortified headquarters in East Prussia. SS Obersturmbannführer Otto Skorzeny, the scarred giant who had rescued Mussolini from captivity and earned the Führer's complete trust, received orders that even he found shocking. Skorzeny, Hitler began, his hands trembling slightly as they often did in those final years. I have a special mission for you, one that requires absolute secrecy and absolute ruthlessness. The operation Hitler outlined was breathtaking in its audacity and its violation of the laws of war. Skorzeny was to form a special unit, Panzer Brigade 150, composed of English-speaking German soldiers. They would wear American uniforms, drive captured American vehicles, and infiltrate deep behind enemy lines during the coming Ardennes offensive. Their mission: spread chaos, cut communication lines, misdirect Allied reinforcements, and capture intact the bridges over the Meuse River that would be crucial to German success. Skorzeny left the meeting with both excitement and dread. He understood immediately that what Hitler was asking bordered on the suicidal. Under the Geneva Convention, soldiers caught fighting in enemy uniforms could be executed as spies. There would be no prisoner of war status, no protection under international law. Any man who volunteered would be signing what might be his own death warrant. But Skorzeny was a soldier who followed orders, no matter how extreme. He set up headquarters at Greifenwald training grounds in Bavaria and began the most unusual recruitment drive in military history. The call went out across every German military unit. Volunteers needed who could speak fluent English. The response was both encouraging and inadequate. Skorzeny had hoped for hundreds of men who had lived in America or Britain, who could pass as native speakers under pressure. What he got was far more modest. Of the approximately 3,300 men who eventually reported to Greifenwald, only about 10 could speak English well enough to pass as Americans. Another 30 to 40 had passable English. The rest ranged from broken schoolroom English to men who knew only a handful of phrases. Skorzeny would have to work with what he had. The volunteers came from diverse backgrounds. Some were German Americans who had been trapped in Germany when war broke out and subsequently drafted into the Wehrmacht. Others were Germans who had worked abroad or studied English extensively. A few were simply opportunists, looking for adventure or a chance to escape the grinding meat grinder of the Eastern Front. The training that followed was unlike anything in military history. At Greifenwald, an entire mock American camp was constructed. German soldiers learned to walk like Americans, with a casual, loose-limbed gait rather than the rigid Prussian march. They studied American slang, learned the names of baseball teams, memorized American military ranks and insignia. They chewed gum, an American habit considered vulgar in German military circles. They practiced complaining about their officers, something that would earn a German soldier severe punishment, but was considered normal behavior for a GI. Don't salute so stiffly, instructors would bark. Americans are sloppy. They salute like they're swatting a fly. The men studied American cigarette brands, Lucky Strike, Camel, Chesterfield. They learned that Americans called their girlfriends dames or dolls. They memorized the capital of Illinois, Springfield, not Chicago, the names of popular movie stars, and the price of a beer in New York City. Mock interrogations became increasingly brutal. Men would be stopped by American MPs and grilled about their units, their hometowns, their favorite radio shows. Those who hesitated or gave wrong answers were pulled from the program. The stakes were too high for mediocrity. Simultaneously, a massive scrounging operation began across occupied Europe. Every captured American Jeep, truck, and armored vehicle was sent to Greif. Mechanics carefully repainted German vehicles in American olive drab. Uniforms were stripped from American prisoners of war and corpses. Dog tags were collected, forged, or stolen. American weapons, Thompson submachine guns, M1 Garand's Browning machine guns, were distributed to men who had trained their entire lives on German arms. The entire operation was cloaked in layers of secrecy and misinformation. Skorzeny deliberately spread rumors that the unit was training for a mission behind Russian lines, or that they were preparing to kidnap General Eisenhower himself, a story that would have significant consequences. By early December, Panzer Brigade 150 was as ready as it would ever be. The unit was divided into several teams. The best English speakers, formed into teams of 4 or 5 men each, would drive deep into Allied territory in American Jeeps. They called themselves the Commandos. Their missions: cut telephone lines, change road signs, remove mines from roads the Germans needed, and place mines on roads they didn't, spread false information, and generally create the maximum possible chaos. The larger force, those with poor or no English, would follow behind the main German assault in American vehicles, hoping to cause confusion and slip through American checkpoints in the fog of battle to capture the crucial Meuse bridges. As the men prepared their equipment on the night of December 15th, a grim understanding passed between them. They had all signed special declarations acknowledging that they understood the risks. If captured, they would likely face a firing squad. There would be no last-minute prisoner exchanges, no appeals to higher authority. The American uniform on their backs was both their camouflage and their death sentence. The assault began at 5:30 a.m. on December 16th with the largest artillery barrage the Western Front had seen since D-Day. Searchlights bounced off the low clouds, creating artificial moonlight that illuminated the surprised American positions. Panzer columns surged forward through the forests, crashing through the thinly held American lines. And within hours of the attack, the first commando teams crossed into American-held territory. Team Steinbach, Lieutenant Gunther Schultz, Corporal Manfred Pernis, and Private Wilhelm Schmidt crossed the lines near Malmedy in a captured Jeep bearing the markings of the American 5th Armored Division. They wore American uniforms, carried American identification, and spoke in careful English. At the first American checkpoint, an MP waved them through without question. The roads were clogged with retreating units, refugees, and reinforcements moving forward. In the chaos, 3 Germans in an American Jeep attracted no attention whatsoever. Their first mission: change the road signs leading to the town of Malmedy. They stopped at a crucial crossroads, and while 2 men stood watch, the third quickly switched the directional signs. American units rushing to reinforce the northern shoulder of the German breakthrough would now find themselves heading southeast instead of northeast, away from where they were desperately needed. Mission accomplished, they drove on. At a deserted stretch of road, they cut telephone wires with bolt cutters, severing communication between a forward American battalion and its regimental headquarters. In the fog of war, this small act would have cascading consequences. Orders wouldn't get through. Requests for reinforcements would go unanswered. Units would feel isolated and vulnerable. Team Steinbach encountered American convoys multiple times that first day. Each time, they would wave cheerfully, call out American slang, and drive past. Schmidt, who had lived in Milwaukee as a child, even stopped to ask directions from an American captain, casually mentioning that he'd heard there were Krauts breaking through up north. The captain thanked him for the information and drove on. Other teams had similar success. Team Brandt cut cables, removed mines from roads the German armor would use, and spread rumors that massive German tank columns were approaching from unexpected directions. Team Fischer, led by a German-American named Otto, actually spent 30 minutes sharing cigarettes with a group of American engineers, gathering intelligence about defensive positions while maintaining perfect American accents. The psychological impact of these operations began almost immediately, though not quite as Skorzeny had planned. An American patrol captured a German soldier on the first day of the offensive. Not one of Skorzeny's men, but a regular Wehrmacht infantryman. Under interrogation, terrified and eager to cooperate, the soldier mentioned that he'd heard rumors of German soldiers being trained to speak English and wear American uniforms. He mentioned something about a plot to capture or kill Allied generals. This information rocketed up the chain of command. By December 17th, Allied headquarters was in near panic. The rumor of Skorzeny's operation, wildly exaggerated with each retelling, spread faster than the German advance itself. What followed was perhaps more effective than any sabotage Skorzeny's commandos could have accomplished: the complete breakdown of trust within American lines. General Omar Bradley, commander of the 12th Army Group, found himself stopped at checkpoints and interrogated by nervous MPs. "What's Mickey Mouse's girlfriend's name?" demanded one sergeant. "Where does the Dodgers' home field?" asked another. Bradley, irritated, correctly identified Minnie Mouse, but got the Brooklyn Dodgers' home field wrong. He said Ebbets Field was in Brooklyn, which was correct, but the interrogator, who was from Chicago and had never been to Brooklyn, thought the answer seemed suspicious. General Bruce Clark was arrested at a checkpoint and held for several hours because his identification seemed too perfect. When he protested, citing his rank, the MP replied, "That's exactly what one of those German bastards would say." The questions devised to identify infiltrators became increasingly absurd and often reflected the regional prejudices of the questioners. Soldiers were asked about baseball statistics, movie stars, state capitals, and American slang. The problem was that many genuine American soldiers, particularly those from rural areas or those who had little interest in popular culture, couldn't answer these questions either. A soldier from rural Montana was detained because he didn't know who won the 1943 World Series. A private from Mississippi was held for 6 hours because his thick accent sounded foreign to an MP from Boston. A young lieutenant was arrested because he pronounced Louisville correctly. The interrogator, who had never been to Kentucky, thought it was pronounced Louisville. The paranoia spread through the ranks like a virus. Soldiers began refusing to follow orders from officers they didn't personally know. Units wouldn't let anyone enter their perimeters without elaborate verification procedures. Critical hours were wasted at checkpoints as genuine American soldiers were interrogated by other equally genuine American soldiers who suspected everyone of being a German infiltrator. At Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force, security around General Eisenhower became suffocatingly tight. The rumor that Skorzeny's mission was to assassinate or kidnap the Supreme Commander, a rumor Skorzeny himself had started as disinformation, was taken deadly seriously. Eisenhower was essentially imprisoned in his own headquarters at Versailles, surrounded by guards, forbidden to move freely. He would later write that he was confined to headquarters and spent a miserable Christmas, unable to visit his troops. Every vehicle approaching important installations was stopped and searched. Passwords changed hourly. Reports came in from across the front of suspicious individuals, most of which turned out to be frightened American soldiers scared of their own shadows. The psychological warfare was working beyond Skorzeny's wildest dreams, but not because of what his commandos were actually doing. It was the fear of what they might be doing that paralyzed the American rear areas. But while paranoia was running rampant, genuine infiltrators were still at work, and the hunt for them was intensifying. On December 17th, Team Steinbach's luck ran out. Approaching a checkpoint near Awale, they were stopped by an unusually alert American sergeant named Robert Billington. Something about the Jeep bothered him, the way it was sitting, perhaps, or a small detail of the markings. He asked the driver, Lieutenant Schultz, where he was from. "Chicago." Schultz replied smoothly. "Yeah? What part?" "North Side." "Me too," the sergeant lied. "What street?" There was the briefest hesitation. Clark Street area. The sergeant's hand moved to his holster. Clark Street, huh? What's the name of the big department store downtown? Schultz tried to remember his training. Marshall Fields, he said, pronouncing each syllable carefully. Wrong answer, the sergeant said, though in fact Schultz had been correct. But the careful pronunciation, the slight German precision in his English, had given him away. Step out of the vehicle, all of you. Hands where I can see them. Within minutes, the team was in custody. A search of the Jeep revealed German identification papers hidden in a secret compartment. Insurance in case they were captured by their own forces, along with German weapons, explosives, and incriminating maps marked with American positions. The interrogation that followed was intense. Initially defiant, the three men eventually confirmed that they were part of Panzer Brigade 150. They described their training, their mission, and the extent of Skorzny's operation. Word of their capture spread through American intelligence channels within hours. Over the next several days, more teams were captured or killed. Team Brandt was discovered when they were observed cutting telephone lines by an American patrol. In the firefight that followed, 2 were killed and 1 captured, badly wounded. Team Fisher made it furthest, penetrating almost to the Meuse River before their Jeep broke down. When they tried to steal another vehicle, they were surprised by its crew. Otto, the German-American team leader, tried to bluff his way out in perfect American English. But one of the American soldiers noticed that the men's boots were German issue. The jig was up. By December 21st, approximately 12 Skorzny commandos had been captured. Another 8 or 9 had been killed in firefights or while trying to escape. The rest had either made it back to German lines or, recognizing that their mission had become too dangerous, had stripped off their American uniforms and surrendered as regular German soldiers. But for those captured in American uniform, there would be no mercy. The trial of the captured commandos was swift and predetermined. Under the laws of war, combatants out of uniform can be tried as spies and saboteurs. The evidence was overwhelming. German soldiers, wearing American uniforms, carrying forged documents, caught behind American lines with weapons and explosives. On December 23rd, the first 3 members of Team Steinbach, Gunther Schultz, Manfred Pernis, and Wilhelm Schmidt, faced an American military tribunal in Henri-Chapelle, Belgium. The proceedings lasted less than 3 hours. The Germans did not deny the charges. Through an interpreter, Lieutenant Schultz explained that they were soldiers following orders, that they had been told their mission was legitimate military deception. The tribunal was unmoved. The law was clear. Soldiers who fight in enemy uniform forfeit protection under the Geneva Convention. The verdict was guilty. The sentence was death by firing squad. At dawn on December 23rd, just 7 days after the Ardennes offensive had begun, the 3 men were led to a wall in a courtyard in Henri-Chapelle. American soldiers who had volunteered for the firing squad stood in a line, their rifles loaded. A chaplain offered final prayers, which the Germans accepted. According to witnesses, all 3 men faced their execution with dignity. They refused blindfolds. Lieutenant Schultz reportedly said, in German, "We are soldiers. We did our duty. Now you do yours." The volley rang out in the cold morning air. 3 bodies slumped against the wall. The first casualties of Operation Greif had become its final casualties. Over the following days, more trials followed. In total, between 18 and 23 members of Panzer Brigade 150 were executed by American firing squads. The historical record is unclear on the exact number. Each trial followed the same pattern: swift presentation of evidence, guilty verdict, immediate execution. Otto Skorzny himself was captured by American forces at the end of the war and put on trial for Operation Greif. Remarkably, he was acquitted. His defense team argued that the operation as conceived, using enemy uniforms for infiltration but not for actual combat, was a legitimate ruse de guerre under international law. The prosecution could not prove that Skorzny's men had actually engaged in combat while wearing American uniforms. Most of the fighting occurred when they were discovered and trying to escape. It was a legal technicality that saved Skorzny's life but did nothing for the men he had sent to their deaths. While the commandos' individual acts of sabotage were tactically successful, Operation Greif, as a whole, must be judged a failure. None of the strategic objectives were achieved. No bridges over the Meuse River were captured. The larger elements of Panzer Brigade 150, those with poor English skills who were supposed to seize bridges in the chaos of the advance, never got close. The German offensive stalled before reaching the Meuse, bogged down by fierce American resistance, lack of fuel, and improving weather that allowed Allied air power to strike. The psychological impact, while significant, was also double-edged. Yes, it created paranoia and confusion in American rear areas, but it also enraged American troops and stiffened their resistance. The idea that Germans were sneaking behind their lines in stolen uniforms, violating the rules of war, made the fighting more brutal and personal. More significantly, Operation Greif diverted scarce resources from where they were desperately needed. The vehicles, equipment, and trained men of Panzer Brigade 150 might have made a real difference if used conventionally on the front lines. Instead, they were frittered away on a mission that achieved minimal concrete results at enormous cost. Skorzeny himself would later write, with characteristic lack of sentimentality, that the operation had been 90% effective as propaganda, 10% effective as sabotage. The fear it created far exceeded the actual damage inflicted. The Battle of the Bulge ground on through December and into January. American forces, after the initial shock, counterattacked with overwhelming force. The German offensive, Hitler's last gamble in the West, collapsed. By the end of January 1945, the lines were back where they had started, but at a staggering cost. Over 80,000 American casualties, nearly 70,000 German casualties, and thousands of Belgian and Luxembourgish civilians dead. The graves of the executed German commandos in Henri-Chapelle remain controversial to this day. Some see them as soldiers who followed orders in wartime. Others view them as war criminals who violated fundamental laws of armed conflict. The truth, as always, is more complex. Operation Greif stands as a testament to the moral ambiguities of total war, where the line between legitimate military deception and war crimes becomes blurred. It demonstrated the power of psychological warfare to create effects far beyond physical sabotage. And it showed how quickly trust, even among allies, can disintegrate under the pressure of fear and uncertainty. For the American soldiers who lived through those December days in the Ardennes, the memory of Operation Greif never entirely faded. For weeks after the last infiltrator had been captured or killed, GIs continued to eye each other with suspicion at checkpoints. The passwords continued. The interrogations continued. The fear that the man in the next foxhole might be a German in disguise took a long time to subside. In the end, perhaps that was Skorzeny's greatest achievement and most terrible legacy, proving that in war, the enemy you fear most might be the one wearing the same uniform as you, speaking the same language, fighting beside you in the snow and darkness of the Ardennes. The Battle of the Bulge would be remembered as Hitler's last offensive, the greatest American battle of World War II. But within that larger story, Operation Greif occupies a unique place, a cautionary tale about deception, sacrifice, and the terrible price paid by soldiers ordered to fight an unconventional war with conventional weapons, where success meant death and failure meant death, and where the line between hero and war criminal depended entirely on which side was writing the history. December 1944. The Ardennes. Snow falling on fresh graves. American soldiers warming their hands over fires, finally beginning to trust each other again. And somewhere in the forest, buried in unmarked graves or resting in military cemeteries, the German soldiers of Operation Greif. Young men who spoke English, wore American uniforms, and paid the ultimate price for following orders that no one should have given. Their story serves as a reminder that in war, the most dangerous enemy is not always the one across the battlefield. Sometimes it's the one you never see coming, disguised as a friend, speaking your language, wearing your uniform, until the moment they strike. And in the frozen forests of the Ardennes, for a few terrible days in December 1944, that nightmare became real.